Guys, Clorinde has been announced, her kit info has dropped, so it's finally time for me to make a video about her. I will be very cautious this time, because there are a few things we still lack context about, but I will tell you what she can do in terms of kit and what I think her potential will realistically be. So, first of all, Clorinde is a 5-star Electro main DPS. Personally, this is exactly what I expected. I heard a lot of rumors that she will be sub DPS, like an Electro sub DPS, but that never made a lot of sense to me. This is because between characters like Yae, Beidou, and the Visual especially, the Electro sub DPS niche is quite covered, they can do much to improve that. Anyway, just to go in order about her kit, for Clorinde it all starts from her elemental skill. When she uses her elemental skill, she enters a special stance that will last for 9 seconds. During this stance, all of her normal attacks will be converted to gunshots. When she hits opponents with her gunshots, she will gain 35% Bond of Life. Yes, Bond of Life again, but fear not, it's simpler than with Arlecchino. With her normal attacks, she will keep gaining Bond of Life until the total amount crosses 100%. And here comes the second part of her special window, because during this stance, her elemental skill will be converted to a Sword Thrust. This skill will consume a lot of the Bond of Life she currently has and deal damage accordingly. It will deal the highest damage possible if the Bond of Life is over 100% when you use the skill. So, based on what I said, the rotation basically boils down to this. You use 3 normal attacks to build up 105 Bond of Life, and then you use the skill to consume it fully and deal as much damage as possible. All of this in loop until the uptime ends. Pretty easy to visualize, honestly. Then come some lateral things that help this core rotation, like for example, her elemental burst is a nice nuke that also gives her 120 Bond of Life. So what you could do is using the burst at the start of her window and then use her skill to capitalize the Bond of Life right after. After that, you can keep going with the combo I mentioned 30 seconds ago. Now, something very important, during her elemental skill stance, she can't be healed. This is just like for Arlecchino. It's a needed thing, because healing will strip the Bond of Life away, this is how it works in Genshin mechanically, so it will make her kit scuff. But just like Arlecchino, she has the means to heal herself. Specifically, earlier I said that the elemental skill consumes the Bond of Life, but what I meant by that is that the elemental skill heals you, and while healing you, it consumes the Bond of Life. In terms of how it works, it's basically the same as what I explained before for the damage of the elemental skill. So, basically, the amount you will heal will depend on how much Bond of Life you have on the skill activation. Honestly, I like it. It's pretty nice, especially compared to what Arlecchino has, because Arlecchino can only heal at the end of the rotation with her burst, while Clorinde will heal continuously as she uses her elemental skills. As a baseline, she should be able to heal by around 15% HP every elemental skill, which is pretty nice. It should be roughly enough to make her survive even without a dedicated defensive option. But there is one crucial difference here compared to Arlecchino, which is that her no healing rule only applies when her elemental skill stance is active. This means that if you heal her before she activates her elemental skill stance, she will be healed normally, so it's not like she can't be used with characters like Baiju, for example. Actually, when played with healers, she gains a new playstyle, sort of. Specifically, while during the duration of her stance she won't receive healing, the healing she would receive is converted to Bond of Life. This means that with a healer on team, she should be able to accumulate more Bond of Life than she normally would. Practically, this means that you will need fewer normal attacks to maximize the elemental skill damage, although this is a bit hard to estimate at the moment, but the potential is there. Still, from an offensive sense, I consider the fact that she can potentially self-sustain and bring 3 offensive units on team very interesting. That's the very interesting part to me. Let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so, because it really helps me notice your support. So, in terms of team potential, it's very important to talk about her first passive here. Clorinde is pretty much stealing from her Fontaine ally here, because her first passive works exactly like Numilet's first passive. Basically, depending on how many different electro reactions are generated by the team, she will gain multiplier increases for elemental skill stance attacks and Elemental Burst. This goes up to 3, so obviously this means that you want to place her on teams with many electro reactions. There is also the scenario where she doesn't specifically need 3 different reactions to maximize the stacks. In this case, her team building and also rotations become very basic, because you just need to proc any reaction 3 different times. It also would allow her to be used on teams that can only proc a limited amount of reactions, like Chevreuse teams for example, that can only proc Overload. Hopefully this is actually how it is, because if it isn't, the situation definitely becomes more tricky. Now, the cool thing here is that Electro can mix with different elements very easily to proc different reactions. For example, you can build an Electrocharge core with Clorinde and Yanan, that way you will get 1 stack thanks to Electrocharge, and the Electro aura will also stay on opponents because of how the reaction works. That will make it very simple for you to proc an Electro Swirl with a character like Kazuha for example, and also possibly other reactions like Overload with a character like Bennett by applying Pyro. Note that I'm not showing you team calculations yet, because I'm not totally sure about Clorinde's rotation timing, so I can't theorize a full team rotation. Her attacks sound very unique, so I can't estimate the animation timings of her skills yet. Anyway, the one team that really sounds interesting to me is Quicken. That's because Quicken and Aggravate count as 2 different reactions. Just to explain, Quicken is what happens when you apply both Dendro and Electro on an opponent, and it generates the Quicken status for 8 seconds, while Aggravate is what happens when you apply Electro on an opponent that's affected by Quicken, and that's what increases your Electro damage. In-game, these are counted as 2 different Electro reactions, like for example, if you check the Thundering Fury set, they're named as 2 different Electro reactions. This means that by just using a Dendro character with Clorinde, you will get 2 stacks for the passive. This is what will allow you to bring a second Electro unit on her Quicken teams, and luckily, because otherwise she wouldn't be able to bring Fischl, and her team situation will be completely dead here. Anyway, her best teammates here will probably be Kazuha, Nahida, and Fischl. This core typically likes to play on 25 seconds long rotations to abuse the fact that Fischl can use odds twice in that time frame through her elemental skill and burst. Normally, this will be a problem for Clorinde since her elemental skill has a 16 seconds long cooldown. So if you want her to use 2 elemental skills at rotation to have 2 different on-field windows and function properly for the team rotation would have to be 32 seconds long at least. Luckily, you can use the Thundering Fury set on her to reduce her cooldowns and make her fit 25 seconds long rotations. So it's definitely quite the perfect fit. Anyway, regarding her damage output, I tried to calculate it making some assumptions I think might be realistic. By this, I mean that I have absolutely no way to tell that whether or not this can be true for sure, but I can at least use my good sense as an experienced player to say that I think this can be realistic. The assumptions here are mostly in terms of combos and how many attacks she can do in those 9 seconds her elemental skill stance lasts. From what I'm seeing here, her damage output looks pretty competitive with her alternatives, which isn't saying much honestly, because her alternatives are not that great, like a Constellation Zero Raiden, catching for Quicken teams, but overall she seems nice. Personally, I believe that she fits on Aggravate teams better than she does on other types of teams, like for example Bennett teams, because the Aggravate teams can take advantage of the fact she can self-sustain much better. Typically, if you want to stay alive in Genshin, you have to use a healer or a shielder, so on Quicken teams the options are Baiju, Yao Yao, Kirara, that are nice, but are no Nahida offensively. Meanwhile, thanks to the fact she can heal herself, Clorinde can use the full offensive core of Fischl, Kazuha, and Nahida, and that's great for the offense. So I'm mostly hyped for her as a Quicken upgrade, because that's the one Electro niche that I think could see an improvement, like a direct improvement. For other roles, I'll have to see more, and also wait for more confirmations in terms of what she can actually do. And I'm done. Bye bye.